had a 16 millimeter camera when I was growing up, and we did quite a few home movies. And I remember once there was a contest in the local newspaper that if you won it, you got a camera and a trip to California or something. But that always spurred me on. I did puppets in 4th grade, and I guess I was always liked to be a showman. After finishing film school at Columbia, I went back to Miami, which had a fledgling film industry. And quite frankly, it was big enough that there were facilities. I mean, we could find, talent and cameras and crew. But it was very, very small, and that has advantages because essentially once we were ready to do a movie down there, we were able to go to Screen Actors Guild and negotiate they had a low-budget contract in those days where we paid everybody minimum union wages other than our 2 stars, and as a result, it was a great place for a person starting out to make movies. Well, we met at graduate school in Columbia in New York City, and he had worked in the industry as an assistant editor on some major films, as I recall, like the James Bond film that was shot down in New Orleans, and some other New York films. And he and I just sort of hit it off and started teaming up because a lot of the school projects were designed for team play, so to speak. And so we ended up doing our thesis film together, which every student had to do to graduate. And once we basically were out of school, we basically figured we should collaborate on a real project. To make Shockwaves a commercial project. We had no interest in doing a personal film. We wanted to, and so we, at the time, again in the mid-70s, there was still a low-budget industry, and we felt that we could do a horror film. And then tossing around ideas for a horror film, we came up with the idea of the Nazi zombies. And then we have these wonderful locations in southern Florida, in the Bahamas, where you can shoot stuff and add a lot of production value that really doesn't cost anything. We used multiple locations for the abandoned hotel. We used the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables, which had been a VA hospital and had been given to the city of Coral Gables by the federal government sometime after World War II. We used the Biltmore, ironically, is the same name, the Biltmore Hotel in West Palm Beach, which was empty at the time. And we used an apartment building in downtown Miami that was also empty at the time as one of our interior locations. And basically cobbled them all 3 together into I think a pretty believable abandoned hotel. The swamps were all, the mangrove swamps, that was just a gorgeous location. It was Matheson Hammock, which is a park in south of Miami, in Miami-Dade County. And back in there, we spent more time back in those swamps. I mean, we were totally shriveled up. Our fingers were, it was unpleasant, to say the least. And we actually did underwater stuff in that same area. There's a little creek went through, and we would do, there's scenes where the water is very murky, and we did underwater stuff there. The sunken ship, we shot off of Bimini in the Bahamas. The sunken ship is a concrete ship, and don't ask me why it's sunk over there, but it's sunk in shallow water, about 12 feet of water. It's a fabulous location because it's so shallow, and so there's good light, there's fish there. It was used as for target practice in WW2 by the pilots. Would go over there and use it for target practice. And we went over there and shot some underwater footage there. There's a scene where my cousin actually is wearing half of a uniform and has a scuba tank on, and we see his feet walking through the wreck. And then there's some scenes with fish around the propeller and this, that, and the other. But that was a great location. The boat, we found this wreck of this old yacht, to use for the charter boat. And we did both the interiors and the exteriors on it. And if I'd known now what pain in the butt it would be to do the interiors, we probably would have gone into a studio and marked it up. But because a boat is like teeny tiny as far as spaces go. And then the long shots of the boat, we went out to what's known as Stiltsville, which is a very well-known area in Biscayne Bay. It's right off of Key Biscayne, and there are houses built on stilts, and there's some deep channels, and there are these flats that are about 2 feet deep. So we would set up on the flat with our camera tripod in the mud, so to speak, and we'd be thigh high in water, and then the boat would be maybe 50 feet away or 100 feet away, and we were able to shoot scenes of the boat. And as long as we shot in certain directions, there is no signs of civilization. The shot with Brooke Adams snorkeling underwater, that was shot off of Key Largo, off of where Carey's Fort Lighthouse is. It's a nice shallow reef, probably about 4 feet deep, right where we actually were shooting. Because again, very, very pretty reef, and very easy to do. Except I was swimming backwards, dragging my butt across fire coral.
Hi. Really gave me a scare.
Sorry. I guess we're all a little jumpy tonight.
I think Brooke worked out to be really, really a good choice. She ended up doing one of the Body Snatcher movies, as I recall, which was in the same genre, so to speak. She became, successful and a name, and I think she was a good choice. She and the wardrobe person got together. The scene where she finds Dobbs was supposed to be shot topless, and she got together with the wardrobe person, who happened to be Ken's wife. And don't ask me why she didn't blab to Ken, but she obviously didn't. So we ended up shooting shots of her that appear around that scene in the yellow bikini top with a shirt, and we couldn't have gotten her topless as a result of that, because when it came time to shoot that scene, there was enough in the can, so to speak, with her wearing the top that we couldn't go backwards and shoot her topless.
What happened?
Get back inside. There's no danger here.
Well, it sounded like we hit something.
Sure, we hit something. A school of canned tuna.
We basically had John Carradine for 5 days, and we had Peter Cushing for 5 days. And those were 2 separate times. And we paid an exorbitant amount of money for each one, as we thought. Back in those days, it was exorbitant for a low-budget film, but we figured it was a good investment. John Carradine was $1,000 a day, and for 5 days, and so in these days that's like dirt cheap, but back then it was real money. Cushing was $25,000 for 5 days, plus first-class air to and from London, plus a hotel, plus a driver. So on a movie that cost $250,000 through a release print, he was 10%. That's a I guess above the certain actors get more than 10% today even, but 10% on a low budget's a lot of money.
Now, just a minute. You mean to say that what we all saw out there is just a mirage?
It was a minor underwater disturbance, with a hot sky acting on a cold current coming from a mile down below.
John Carradine was old. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And we didn't. And I will recall the scenes where he's in his cabin on the boat, and he would fall asleep between takes. But he was always there. And what a trooper. We shot the scene where they dinghy into the island with the glass bottom dinghy, and they're rowing in, and they look down, and all of a sudden you see him sort of pasted up against the glass bottom underwater. We shot that in my swimming pool. We dressed it with palm fronds and stuff on the bottom so it wouldn't look like a swimming pool. But But when we had a couple of, gophers, hold them down. Basically we'd all get ready to do the scene, and they'd hold them down, and we had, some ropes to pull the dinghy across over them, and I was in the boat, looking, with the camera, shooting the POV stuff, and I bet we shot that 2, 3, 4 times. He'd come sputtering up, and got ready to go back for another take if we needed it.
And now you have found me.
Peter Cushing was like perfect for that character. He had the Nazi accent down perfect. He wears a hairpiece most of the time, and he was more than willing not to wear the hairpiece for the part. And in between, he was a chain smoker like most Brits and Europeans of that era were, and always wore a white cotton glove so he didn't get any nicotine stains on his hands while he smoked. The zombies are like a whole nother story, is the zombies, because we had an open casting. In those days, if you wanted an open casting, you would put an ad in the Miami Herald. And we put an ad in the Miami Herald, zombies wanted for a low-budget horror film. And we hired a meeting room at a relatively inexpensive motel in Coral Gables and had an open call. And spent the day going through zombies. Unbeknownst to us, the Miami Herald sent a reporter undercover, thinking this was some sort of scam, and he got hired, Jay Mader. He has these wonderful Germanic cheekbones and sharp nose. He's the one that kills Jack Davidson in the end of the movie. But he never let on the entire shoot that he worked for the Miami Herald. As a result, we got some really nice pieces eventually in the Miami Herald once the shoot was over. The fat zombie with the bald head was just like a comic book nut. I think he probably lived with his mother, and he'd be a blogger today, and had comic books. But the zombie we got the most miles out of was a guy that carried an old leather suitcase, and in his leather suitcase he had a loaded .38 revolver, and he would do anything we asked of him. And so there are scenes where he's walking amongst the coral, full frame. I mean, you really see him walking in the coral. The way we did that, I mean, one could never get away with this today, but we literally went down to Pennycamp Park in Key Largo. I think Jack Davidson came as sort of the boat guy, so we'd have a person in the boat. I went, and the zombie went. And we went out, and we were in probably 20 feet of water. We had 2 scuba tanks, one I was wearing, and one for the zombie, who didn't wear it, of course. And we would get down there in the water, and through sign language, we'd figure out what he was going to do. So he would set his tank down. I'd get maybe 6 feet away from him, because underwater everything looks much farther away. And he would go ahead and walk, with leaving his tank, and he had his pockets full of lead weights to hold him down. And at the end of maybe a 30-second take, when he was feeling a little out of breath, he would give me a signal of some sort. So I would set the camera down, swim over to him, take my mouthpiece, put it in his mouth, grab him by the scruff of the neck, because he couldn't see anything, drag him back to where his tank was, and plug him back into his tank, and then we'd shoot it again. Wow. And we did that for about 1 tank's worth of air, 1 magazine worth of film. And those shots are marvelous, in my opinion. I think they're wonderful shots. We did the zombies, all second unit. We finished the principal photography. And obviously during principal photography we had to do certain scenes with the zombies because they interacted with the characters. But then all of the mood stuff with the zombies, where there's total separation from any of the talking roles, so to speak, we did second unit. and we had the luxury of time, so to speak, because they were costing us $25 each a day, so they were cheap and kind of expendable, except that you got to keep them alive. And so we shot the entire film. What we asked, on 16 millimeter, mainly for the cost, that we could shoot a lot of film and then pick and choose, as opposed to shooting less film at 35. Blow-ups were relatively rare. We literally flew the film out to New York City every day, and then back in those days, you actually could book it on a flight, just like checked luggage. So we'd take a case of film to the airport. It would get checked on a certain flight. Someone from TVC would meet it at the other end. It would go into TVC overnight, be processed and printed, and then put on a plane. And so pretty much, a little more than 24-hour turnaround, even though it was going to New York City. But the beauty is that we shot the entire film with an Eclair ACL, which is probably the size of a home videotape recorder, relatively small. And there were scenes that we're doing in the water where we literally have the camera lens about 6 inches above the water because we could do it. And I think it made for the mood, really helped the mood of the film is where the camera was in so many of the scenes. MGM offered to pick it up. They screened it. They offered to buy the film, but they wanted 100% of the rights, and their upfront cash was not going to put us in profits. And knowing how accounting works in the film industry, we didn't want to have all our eggs in one basket. So Joe Brenner picked it up with a much more modest amount of money, but he only took the domestic rights. And so as a result, we were able to sell individually all of the rest of the world. And quite frankly, that's where the profits came from, was the rest of the world. And we were able to sell the TV, where we did get the late night network release on CBS. The goal with Shockwaves was to make, at the end of the day, have more money in our pocket than we had before we started. Have a real film and have a finished film. And I don't know the statistics, but I bet they're still the same. It's the odds of finishing a film are tremendously against the independent filmmaker. The odds of getting a film released are tremendously against the independent filmmaker. The odds of making money are tremendously against them. And then the odds of having legs, so to speak. Here we are, 40 years, and someone is spending real money to make a Blu-ray of the movie we made in the mid-'70s. That feels it feels very good. It's not Gone with the Wind, it's not a lot of other good movies, but it's something. Every now and then, for whatever reason, I'll find myself Googling something, and sometimes just checking my own name to make sure there's nothing nasty out there. And there'll be a reference to Shockwaves, and so then I'll go to IMDb or some other site and end up bouncing around, read some reviews, and it's always a kick in it always feels good to go back and read positive comments that some people have written over the years on that movie. And the one that you have to laugh at is it's the best Nazi zombie movie, because I don't know, I think it's 3 of them in the world, Nazi zombies, it's praise, but it's kind of